So Tim, tell me and us what it means to be the program director of Times Radio.
Thank you so much. And isn't Kate amazing, by the way?
Yes.
That was so inspiring. So yes, thanks so much for having me. I run Times Radio, which it's 5 years old this summer, and it's a new national, high quality, I'd like to say, intelligent speech news radio station from the Times and Sunday Times. And it was set up by the Times and Sunday Times really because it wants to modernize its appeal. It's not just about newspapers anymore. It's about apps and the website. And but they're mindful that the Times is behind a paywall, and so not everyone can get hold of that journalism. But Times Radio is free. You can listen to it on digital radio, DAB, smart speaker, web, app. And if you haven't tried it, please do. But the thing is that it's a real privilege to. I set up Times Radio. Launched it in June 2020, and it's a real privilege to run it because really what we're trying to do is actually counter some of the things we've talked about on the stage already. The ethos behind Times Radio was really forged actually as a reaction to the polarization that we saw, particularly around the Brexit debate, in the sense that there was all this heat and no light, and that everyone was shouting at each other. And actually, what we want to do is have intelligent discussion about the news, and we're really proud of things like one of our little mantras we use is conversation, not confrontation. And when we have politicians on, when we have experts on, we want to hear what they've got to say. We don't shout them down, we don't want to hector them. And I'm just really proud, to your question, I'm really proud to run it because I'm a Christian, and I think that the kind of Christian principles that I believe in help influence our mindset, both on air, but also, as a production team, how we run the thing.
And Tim, if you go back to the beginning of your journey, what was your vision? What made you think, do you know what, I'm going to go into the world of media? What was the catalyst for that?
So that, I think, is so interesting because I, grew up watching television, listening to radio like everyone here. And I think I just got more and more annoyed by how Christianity was portrayed. I would see, sitcoms where Christian vicars were these figures of fun, and I thought it was. I remember actually my granddad saying, I must have been. Gosh, I'm actually going to slightly well up, slightly remembering him because I was like 12 watching some sitcom, and he said, and I sort of giggled a bit, and he said, "How can you giggle at that? They're mocking your faith," and I thought. And that sort of stuck with me, and I felt like I want the Christians I saw on television were not like the Christians I knew. The Christians I knew were sensible, clever, interesting, thoughtful, caring people. And I suppose part of what I've wanted to do is make sure that wherever I've worked, can I get Christians on the media who I think represent what the church is trying to do. And we all know that the way the media works is people get hold of someone, they get their contacts, they think, oh, they're good, they deliver, they'll come on. And so you have the same sort of people appearing. And I felt like some of those same people were the wrong sort of, they just weren't representing the sort of Christian faith that I was, aware of. And so I've tried to bring on to places where I've worked in a fair way, people who I feel like will speak intelligently and thoughtfully about Christian things. And then also, once people get in, then, the producers, they think, oh, they're good, we'll book them again.
Yeah.
And so one of my messages is, if you ever get invited to appear, say yes, even if it's a bit inconvenient, because you never know where that might lead.
So talk to me about that, because you and I have discussed this. And do you find it easy to get Christians to say yes in, say, comparison to a politician?
I don't.
Okay. And why do you think that is?
So.
Okay, you need to hear this, guys. Okay.
No,
so when Tim rings you, okay, you need to say yes.
So I think what's interesting is that Christians can sometimes say, oh, there's not enough about Christianity in the media, and it's always the negative stuff, and it's not the good things that are going on. And it's so interesting because I have over 25 years in the media. invited Christians who I think have got something to say to appear on the programs and things that I've been responsible for or involved in. Sometimes people say, yes, that's great. I've been struck by how many times people say no. And I think it's a couple of things. There's two things, really. The first is I think people are afraid of the media, and they worry that their words are going to get taken out of context. And I suppose what I would say to that is, certainly, if I ask, I'm not going to stitch you up. But also, I think if producers ask you, it's because normally they've seen something that you might have said, or they've heard about you, or they've found you, and they think it's interesting what you've got to say. And I think everyone's fearful of. Do you remember Gerard Ratner, the guy who famously brought down his own chain because of, he said something and it got blown up? I think everyone's afraid of that. And I suppose what I would say is, I mostly work in live media, live radio, live television. And I think in live media, you have got so much more agency over what you say, because you only need to say what you want to say. And if they ask you a question that you're not comfortable, just say, my favorite technique is, I don't know about that. What I do know is about this.
So I've been like in Parliament, and there's what I call a broom cupboard in Parliament. It's like a tiny, tiny little room, and my day's been absolutely mental. And I've seen politicians go into the broom cupboard literally to do radio interviews when they're like between thousands and thousands of meetings. Or I've been with a politician who has stopped the car and literally done the interview on their phone, and then and we don't tend to think like that. So, like, what would do you think we need to be kind of perfect in our lives before we do this? Do you think we need to have the perfect environment to be able to do this?
Yes.
What are your
So
thoughts?
I think that was actually kind of be my second point, which is availability. So the first one, just to finish off the first one, which is really that I think people are worried, and so I think, and actually, but they want to hear what you've got to say, and also the appearances are never as long as you think they're going to be. You go on particularly on live broadcast, and it's 2 or 3 minutes, 4 or 5 questions. You don't have to be perfect. That's your point, Philippa. And I think the second thing is just simply make yourself available. Politicians, I've fixed politicians. That's the word we use, to fix, as in to arrange a guest.
If only.
Yeah. and you say, there's this vote coming up, can you come on our radio show at 10:05? They go, I'm at a dinner. But they go, I'll just pop out and do it on the phone and come back again. And I think, so it's very interesting. I wanted to tell a quick story. So we've talked last night and today about the Quiet Revival. I'm so excited about the Quiet Revival and its positive stories about Christianity in the media. And we've done it a couple of times on Times Radio, I'm pleased to say. Chinny MacDonald, who you may know, was on Easter Monday talking about it. We had the Evangelical Alliance on. But interestingly, we probably all heard stories about on Easter Sunday, there were churches full to bursting. And there was one church that I knew about. And so a week later, I wanted to reflect that on Times Radio. And so I invited someone on. And the person said, it's Sunday. I'm getting ready for preaching, and I can't do it. And now, it did turn out this person was making a trip, so I don't want to kind of be too unfair, but I'd fixed a slot of 7:50 a.m. We all know church starts about 10:30, and I thought, just break off from whatever you're doing for 5 minutes and do it on the phone. And the second point, I think, is that, and I really want to sort of make this point, is that if you do it once and it goes well, then they invite you back and they get to know you. And again, I'll never forget, there was a quite well-known evangelist a few years ago who met up with me and said, I'd love to be on the media more. What do I need to do? And we dug into it. And then it turned out this person lives in London, but the BBC's religious affairs unit is in Manchester. And it turned out this person was being invited by the BBC to appear on their output, but they wanted this person in Manchester. And this person said to me, but I know some people in Manchester, so I tend to put them on to them. And I said, they've invited you because they want you, and it's entirely possible you put them onto that other person, and they never book them because they're not actually doing what they want to do. So we ended up with he said, what's your advice to me? And I just said, drive up the M6 more. And but my point is, we know Brian Cox, the famous scientist, and he presents BBC programs, and that started because he was, as you may know, in a pop group called D-Ream, but actually he was he then trained as a scientist. And Horizon just did a documentary about something or other. And they invited him to speak, and he did some interviews, and a couple of interviews. But they just liked how he came across. They liked his look, they liked whatever. They asked him to do a bit more. And he, now a famous presenter, but if he'd said no to that one little documentary for Horizon, it might never have happened. So I suppose I just encourage you, like, be brave, as Kate said, and take the opportunity. If people offer you an opportunity to speak in the media, please do.
So basically, I think Tim is actually being very polite as he is speaking with us. He's saying, if I ring you and I invite you onto the Times Radio, it's because we view you as an expert in what you're doing. We respect you, and we want your voice on this, and say yes and come. Is that roughly?
Correct.
Tim, can we just say a huge thank you to you? Very grateful. Can you say thank you? Thank you for everything you're doing, Tim. Thank you. Thank you.